Most strategies don't fail because they are bad. They fail because they are asked to do something they were never designed to do. A strategy that works beautifully at a small scale can collapse the moment you increase size, pressure, or visibility. This isn't bad luck, and it isn't incompetence. It's a structural reality that catches people off guard precisely because early success feels like proof that the strategy is universally sound. At a small scale, almost everything works better than it should. Friction is low, feedback is fast, and errors are cheap. You can move quickly, adjust intuitively, and rely on personal judgment. When something breaks, you notice immediately. When something works, you double down. This environment rewards simplicity and aggression. It creates the illusion that the strategy itself is responsible for the results, when in reality, scale is doing a lot of hidden work in your favor. As size increases, the environment changes before the strategy does. Constraints appear where none existed. Delays stretch feedback loops. Side effects emerge that were invisible at smaller volumes. The same actions now push against systems, people, and markets that respond differently when stressed. What once felt like skill starts to feel like resistance, and the instinctive reaction is to push harder instead of stepping back. One of the most common reasons strategies fail at scale is that they rely on conditions that only exist when you're small. You might depend on speed, flexibility, or anonymity. You might rely on personal relationships, informal decision-making, or the ability to change direction without consequence. These advantages evaporate as size increases. The strategy doesn't break suddenly. It slowly loses the conditions it needs to function. Another hidden issue is that success at small scale often masks inefficiencies. When volumes are low, waste is tolerable. When the stakes are small, errors don't matter. When attention is focused, problems can be manually patched. Scaling doesn't just increase output, it amplifies inefficiency. What was once a minor annoyance becomes a bottleneck. What was once a workaround becomes a liability. Many strategies also depend on a narrow edge that disappears under scrutiny. When you're small, you can exploit gaps in systems, markets, or behaviors that aren't designed to notice you. As you grow, you become visible. Your actions attract attention. Competitors respond. Rules change. The edge that once gave you outsized results gets competed away or regulated out of existence. There is also the problem of impact. At small scale, your actions barely move the environment. At larger scale, your actions change the environment itself. Prices shift, incentives change, and behaviors adapt. The strategy that worked when the system was static now fails because the system is reacting to you. You're no longer playing the game, you're altering it. Feedback is another silent killer. Small-scale strategies benefit from fast, clear signals. You try something, you see what happens, and you adjust. As size increases, feedback becomes slower, noisier, and more ambiguous. Results lag behind decisions. Outcomes are influenced by more variables. It becomes harder to tell whether the strategy is working or failing in real time, leading to delayed responses and overcorrections. Human limitations play a bigger role than most people expect. At small scale, a single person or a tight group can hold the entire system in their head. They understand the nuances, remember exceptions, and apply judgment fluidly. As size increases, cognitive load explodes. Decision-making has to be distributed. Judgment gets replaced with rules. Nuance gets replaced with process. If the strategy depends on human intuition, it will degrade as that intuition is diluted. In many cases, scaling forces specialization, and specialization breaks strategies built on generalists. A founder-led approach might thrive on one person wearing 10 hats. At scale, roles narrow, communication fragments, and incentives diverge. The strategy may assume alignment and shared context that no longer exists. What was once coordinated implicitly now requires explicit systems, and those systems lag behind reality. Risk behaves differently at scale as well. Small strategies can survive volatility because losses are containable. You can recover quickly. At scale, downside risk compounds. Errors propagate through systems. A single mistake can cascade into multiple failures. Strategies that rely on aggressive risk-taking often implode, not because the bets are wrong, but because the consequences of being wrong become unacceptable. Another overlooked factor is that scaling exposes assumptions you didn't know you were making. You assume resources will always be available, that quality will remain consistent, that people will behave rationally, that demand will remain stable. These assumptions hold at small scale because variance is low. At larger scale, variance becomes unavoidable, and assumptions turn into points of failure. There is also an emotional component to strategy failure at scale. Early success creates attachment. People fall in love with the method that got them here. When signs of strain appear, they are interpreted as temporary setbacks rather than structural mismatches. Instead of redesigning the strategy, people defend it. They add complexity, layer fixes, and rationalize declining performance until the system collapses under its own weight. Efficiency often decreases before it increases. Scaling requires investment in infrastructure, people, and process that don't immediately pay off. If a strategy is optimized for short-term efficiency, it may fail to survive the transition period. The dip in performance feels like failure, even though it may be the cost of building a sustainable system. Many strategies are abandoned at exactly the point where they needed to evolve. In some cases, the original strategy simply cannot be scaled without becoming a different strategy altogether. What worked as a craft must become an operation. What worked as intuition must become analysis. What worked as opportunism must become discipline. This transformation is uncomfortable because it requires admitting that the original approach, while effective, has reached its limits. There is also the issue of incentives. At small scale, incentives are usually aligned. Everyone involved shares the same goals, risks, and rewards. As size increases, incentives fragment. Different groups optimize for different outcomes. A strategy that assumes alignment starts producing unintended behavior. People do what benefits them locally, even if it hurts the system globally. Complexity grows non-linearly with size. Double the scale, and you more than double the interactions. More products, more customers, more regulations, more dependencies. Strategies that rely on simplicity and direct control struggle in complex environments. They either oversimplify reality or drown in exceptions. Sometimes strategies fail at scale because they were never strategies in the first place, just tactics that happen to work. A clever maneuver, a timing advantage, or a temporary inefficiency can generate impressive results early on. But tactics don't scale without a strategic framework. When conditions change, there's nothing underneath to adapt. Another painful truth is that some strategies work only because the operator is exceptional. They rely on rare skills, energy, or judgment that cannot be replicated. When size demands delegation, performance drops. The strategy wasn't scalable because the person wasn't scalable. This isn't a flaw in the person. It's a misunderstanding of what was actually driving success. External environments also shift as you grow. Regulations increase, expectations rise, and scrutiny intensifies. Compliance, reputation, and governance become real constraints. Strategies that thrived in informal or lightly regulated spaces struggle when rules harden. What once felt like freedom now feels like friction. There is a temptation to believe that scaling is just doing more of the same. In reality, scaling is doing different things for different reasons. It requires redesigning the system, not stretching it. When people try to scale by force, they often break the very mechanisms that made the strategy work initially. The paradox is that scaling often demands restraint. You must slow down to build capacity. You must standardize to enable speed later. You must accept short-term pain for long-term stability. Strategies built on constant momentum struggle with this shift. They confuse motion with progress. Failure at scale is often blamed on execution, but the deeper issue is design. The strategy was optimized for a world that no longer exists. Execution problems are symptoms, not causes. Fixing them without revisiting the underlying assumptions only delays the inevitable. Understanding why strategies fail at scale requires humility. It requires acknowledging that early success doesn't prove universal validity. It requires separating what worked because of the strategy from what worked because of context. Most importantly, it requires recognizing that growth changes the game. The most resilient strategies are those designed with scaling in mind from the beginning. They anticipate friction, build slack, and evolve deliberately. They accept that what works now may not work later, and they treat adaptation as a feature, not a failure. If your strategy is failing as you increase size, it may not mean you chose wrong. It may mean you've outgrown it. The question isn't how to force it to work harder, but how to redesign it for the world you're now operating in. Scaling isn't a test of endurance, it's a test of understanding.